team at Meridian Agriculture have been thinking about some of the implications of the seasonal conditions for our farmers in parts of the state. Things are not going too badly at all, mainly in the southwest of Victoria, but most of the rest of the state has had much lower than normal rainfall and also some pretty dry subsoil conditions, and the outlook is for drier than normal conditions and also warmer than normal. So we've been thinking about what are the high level decisions that a lot of our farmers can be making and what some of the strategies that they could use. And one of the key things is that farmers should be thinking about strategies before they become really important. So what happens if it doesn't rain in the next 2 weeks or the next month? That they've already made some of those decisions and they can act on them if those conditions occur. So we are going to talk to James Whale from the southwest of the state, where they have had slightly better conditions than the rest of the state, about some of the strategies for there, and also Jim Shovelton, based up in the northeast, to talk about what some of the things in that part of the state, which has been drier than normal, should be thinking about. James, the forecast for the late winter and spring is likely to be drier than average conditions. So tell us about some of the things that your farmers in an area that's been probably better than some of the rest of the state should be thinking about.
Thanks, Paul. Well, I think now is certainly the time to be thinking about the plan for increased or maximising the amount of fodder conservation possible within your own production system. So whether that's hay or silage, there's certainly certainly in our area, there's some really good opportunities. We've got full soil moisture, and it's about capitalising on that potential. We know that it's highly likely that grain prices are going to be much higher this year, as well as other fodder options. If you can actually even get hay this season out of other districts is very questionable at this stage. So it's about planning what strategies you're going to put in place to maximise fodder conservation.
So what are some of those strategies that people should be putting into place on farm?
So probably one of the first ones is trying to work out just how much country, how much land can be locked up for hay or silage. So of course we've got to also be able to support the existing grazing system. So what some of my clients are doing at the moment, we're looking at feed budgets to work out how much area of how much of the grazing area can be locked up, and then it's about the economics of doing that hay or silage. It's about what sort of fertiliser strategies or fertiliser inputs we're going to look to apply to maximise yield. And so on some of our properties at the moment, conditions are actually very wet, and there's going to be some decisions in the next few weeks about if we actually can't get on there because conditions being too wet, will we look to fly on fertiliser, nitrogen, to make sure we can really maximise, certainly optimise the results from those hay and silage paddocks.
And what about in terms of the management of animals, breeding stock or young stock that you're wanting to finish off? Any strategies there that people should be looking at yet?
Thanks, Paul. Great question. I mean, I think it's probably in our area at the moment, it's no different from any other year, except for the fact that will the dry conditions come into our part of the world, and perhaps we are more likely to have a cut-off spring. So certainly thinking about store lambs, for example, might be a tactic that some producers will use, and also earlier intervention of supplementary feed programs to really maximise growth rates, to get to either finish lambs earlier than what you usually do, or get lambs to weights that they're store ready. So that early intervention of supplementary feeding programs is high on the agenda.
Good. Jim, much of the state, apart from the southwest, has had really dry conditions this year. We've got low subsoil moisture, and the outlook now is for most likely being lower than average conditions for the rest of the year. What are some of the things that farmers in these areas should be thinking about over the next couple of months and then a bit more longer term?
Yeah. Look, I think that they need to, first of all, have a look at what they think the season's going to do and what that's going to do to feed availability. I think that September's a pretty critical month for us in that average rainfall over the last 15 years has been generally below average. You combine that with low subsoil moisture, and you combine that with the predictions for higher than summer, higher than normal sort of spring temperatures. You know, potentially we're looking at what happened a couple of years ago with a very short end of the season. So I think there's really, if that's a scenario, and I think that's on the basis of fairly likely, there needs to be some really hard thinking done at the moment.
So Jim, hard thinking in terms of the way they manage their pastures and potential to be able to cut hay?
Yeah, look, I think that a lot of people are probably not going to be set up to cut hay. I mean, a lot of the sheep producers will be buying in grain or would have bought in grain. I'm not too sure what the chances are of people being able to lock in prices at this stage. I think the first thing is to make sure you get as much growth out of your pastures at the moment before the moisture runs out while you've still got good growing conditions. I think it's then having a really clear look at what stock you might have that might be surplus that you can get off the place. Traditionally, when you look at prices, they tend to, you know, in these sort of years go south in probably that September, or certainly in October. And so if there are surplus stock that you don't need, think about getting rid of the ones that are the non-producers if you know what they are.
And should farmers be worried about the cost of buying back into a breeding herd if they do sell off some breeding stock at a time like this?
Or traditionally, if you look at it, the prices after the drought come back to where they were before the drought. Now, that may not happen this year, but traditionally that's what happens. You don't actually have that huge spike. I guess the thing to consider is that you do maintain the base of a breeding herd that actually can provide cash flow. If you get rid of all your breeders, then you've obviously got a real delay in getting cash flow back into the system.
And tell us about stock water. Do you think that's likely to be an issue moving forward?
Oh, look, I think it depends where you are. I think sort of east of the highway, probably not too bad. That seems to be okay. Get onto the flatter country where, you know, and the drier hills, there's probably not been a lot of runoff there, so that's a real issue. So I think having a stock take of what your water supplies are is going to be pretty critical. If you're not sure you can make it through, then carting water is a pretty expensive exercise. If you are looking at trying to maximise production with limited water, things you need to consider is maybe it's not too late in some areas to use some nitrogen. It may not be too late to take out some of those unproductive species that are going to soak up water, like capeweed or some of your broadleaves. So there still might be an opportunity to take those out. So what you've got left is stuff that's going to, it's got good quality. It's got the capacity to respond a bit later into the season if we do keep getting that bit of extended rain.
So after having heard Jim talk about things in a drier part of the state and James talk about some of the issues for a slightly better part of the state, and if you're wanting to talk to somebody a little bit more detail about the situation for your own property, then please get in touch with us via the Meridian Agriculture website or give us a ring.